can vary in forms and power. And in the last episode of this, we broke down the basics of them all, but we never properly explained the key factors. In this Pokémon Educators episode, we'll be breaking down each of the separate types to help you decide on what kind of strategy best suits you out of all 18 types. To clarify, we'll be going through the Generation 3 attack style, their weaknesses and strengths, special effects of the types such as statuses, and how to employ them in battle. As mentioned, there are 18 types in the series: Normal, Fire, Water, Grass, Ghost, Poison, Rock, Ground, Psychic, Bug, Electric, Ice, Fighting, Flying, Dragon, Dark, Steel, and Fairy. Each of these types are unique in different ways, but most notably is how they can synergize with one another, such as elemental triangles, where one type is strong against another, but is weak to another in a connecting triangle, such as fire being weak to water, water being weak to grass, and grass being weak to fire. I'll use different Pokemon for each different example, so no more dawdling, let's just get to further detail. Normal is the most common type that you will find out in the open world and is commonly open for strategy. Pokemon of this type are only weak to fighting, but when using attacks from this type, be wary of Steel, Fighting, and Ghost types. Otherwise, they can take hits from nearly anything that you can think of. In Generation 3, they specialized in physical attacks and can roll punches with force, and popular normal types include Eevee, Snorlax, and Slaking. Not much else can really be said other than the very expansive move pool they have, with access to moves such as Explosion for grand physical damage, or Swagger with messing your opponent with confusion. Fire types is what I would like to consider a starter type, one of which you can get as soon as you dive into the game with choices like Charmander or Chimchar, and it's part of the basic elemental triangle. They have a unique attribute where their attacks will commonly burn the opponent, which halves physical attack power and damage the opponent for 1/8 of their health. In Generation 3, they specialized with special attack, given that the majority of their attacks were ranged, such as Fire Blast or Inferno. Pokemon like these that are highly regarded by the public include Arcanine, Entei, and Charizard. A basic way to use these guys is to hinder your opponent with burns, and don't let your weaknesses of ground, rock, and water be exploited. Water, like its fire counterpart, is a starter type with Pokemon like Oshawott or Squirtle to back you up. Another part of the basic elemental triangle, and are known to be fairly bulky and can take hits fairly well the majority of the time. Favorites of this type include Vaporeon, Starmie, and Quagsire, and each water type from Generation 3 and lower specialized in special attack respectively. Their main weaknesses of Grass and Electric make them pretty decent at coverage, especially when they are known to be strong against Fire, Rock, and Ground, the opposite to their Fire type rivals. The best way to play with these guys is to simply hang tough and hinder your opponent slowly. Grass is the final part of the starter elemental triangle with starters like Turtwig and Treecko. They are known to hinder and keep alive by slowly taking their opponent's HP to add to their own by using moves like Giga Drain or Leech Seed. Like water types, they can take a decent beating a majority of the time by physical attackers. They also act as a supported class with having access to powder moves like Stun Spore, Poison Powder, and Spore. Be wary around fire, poison, flying, and bug types, and you should be okay with using these guys for quite a while to hinder your opponent bit by using Pokemon like Venusaur, Roserade, or Ludicolo, and making use of their special attack specialty from Generation 3. To the more exotic types, we have Ghost. These spooky fellas are weak to their own type, but in Generation 2 and onwards, it gained the weakness of Dark as well. It can take hits from Poison and Bug types, but their moves can hit hard against Psychic types. Remember that Normal and Fighting will do nothing to it as well, but Ghost-type attacks do nothing to normal. Popular Pokemon of these supportive special attackers include Gengar, Misdreavus, and Trevenant, and these guys love to mark their opponents by using attacks from other types like Fire Blast or Thunder to make use of their good special attacks and mess with their opponents as much as possible with moves like Curse or Confuse Ray. Poison is another unique type with access to a very special attribute. These guys are most commonly tanks with fellows like Garbodor, Weezing, or Nidoking, and the best way to use these guys is to avoid ground or psychic types as much as possible and weaken your opponent with Toxic, a special move they have which inflicts bad poison to your opponent. Toxic Poison, or Badly Poison, is a status condition that will deal 1/16 of the afflicted Pokemon's HP on the first turn, then 2, and so on until it is guaranteed to do 100% of their HP. Steel and other poison types are immune to this, of course, as well as Pokemon with an ability called Magic Guard during battle. Outside of that, moves like Poison Jab or Sludge Bomb are Poison type's best friend and good with physical power, which is their specialty. Rock types are known for their heavy physical bulk and can take hits from most types, but have weaknesses of water, fighting, grass, and steel types. Outside of those, the plus side of these guys like Golem, Tyranitar, and Tyrantrum is their talent for taking on flying and fighter types with vigor and making use of moves like Smackdown or Sandstorm to hit the battlefield to your favor. If these guys aren't physical tanks, they are physical glass cannons, meaning you're better off hitting your opponent as hard as possible as soon as you hit that battlefield. Ground Pokemon are similar to their rock counterparts and are commonly synergized with one another. Again, with having good physical power and having moves like Earthquake and Bulldoze that can really assist you as well. As risky as it can be because with moves like those, you can unintentionally hit your teammate or your own Pokemon. Popular choices include Dugtrio, Nidoqueen, and Flygon for their great type coverage and having some kind of solution for their water, grass, and ice weaknesses, such as Flygon's Fire Punch or Nidoqueen's Avalanche. Psychic was initially one of the strongest types in the early generations, especially in the first generation with having the weaknesses of Ghost and Bug. In Generation 2 and onwards, they became more balanced by having a weakness to Dark as well, even if it still made them quite powerful against many other Pokemon such as Poison and Fighting. Pokemon like Alakazam, Espeon, and Gardevoir are common choices to use, and their types are commonly used for strong special attacks, able to confuse their opponents and create difficult scenarios with moves like Mirror Coat or Trick Room. Bug back in the Generation 1 days were severely weak, but in more recent generations, they became much more stronger. Having weaknesses to fire, flying, and rock, but is resistant to itself, grass, ground, and fighting makes it one of the more varied Pokemon to have in your arsenal, especially in the later portions of the games. Pokemon like Yanmega, Butterfree, and Heracross can make use of either physical attacks to bring down your opponent with force or can act as a supporting class by using status moves, Butterfree especially with having access to Psychic and the powder moves listed with the grass types. Electric is commonly known for their high speed stat and can hinder their opponent with their unique status condition, Paralysis. This condition halves the hindered Pokemon's speed and has a 25% chance to prevent the Pokemon from moving. Pokemon that are popularized with this type include Jolteon, Pikachu, and Luxray. Each are able to put pressure on the opponent by making use of their good speed stats, then use moves like Thunderbolt to hit harder, or use Charge Burst to increase its damage input for one full turn. Their only threat is ground types, seeing as they are immune to their shocking moves. Okay, I'm sorry, that pun was really bad. So their best counter to this is to have a move to cover for this, like having a move that they are weak to or neutral at best, making sure to use their special attack stat as well. Ice is normally a bad typing for a lot of people. The main reason for this is because it's only resistant to its own type and is weak to fire, fighting, steel, and rock. I beg to differ. They hit hard against grass, ground, dragon, and flying, making it potent against 4 types across the board. They use special attacks from generations 3 and lower and can use moves such as Hail, which is somewhat similar to Sandstorm, but it was changed to Snowscape from generation 9. They also have a unique effect where they can freeze their opponents, although the odds of this are rare, sitting at a 10% chance for it to happen with moves like Ice Beam. Freeze is a condition that'll prevent the Pokemon from moving for a random amount of turns and is remarkably strong. Fire types and ice types are immune to this effect, and getting hit by a fire type move will thaw out the hindered Pokemon. Commonly used Pokemon for this type include Frosmoth, Lapras, and Vanillux, which can all really force some pressure on their opponent by simply gaining strength before releasing their frozen Armageddon. Fighting is a fairly common type to find as well, specializing in physical attacks from Generation 3 and lower. They normally would hit harshly with moves like Dynamic Punch or High Jump Kick and are supported by strong glass cannons like Machamp, Primeape, or Hitmonlee. Their defenses will vary from being able to take good hits in general or just blindly swinging as harshly as possible, meaning that they will really hinder their opponent as early as they can. Their biggest threats are Psychic, Fairy, and Flying in more recent generations, but bear in mind they're also hindered by Ghost types without being able to hit them without some kind of type coverage, or being afraid of Fire types with their chance of burning them as well, seeing as they need their physical attack stat as high as possible. Flying is another physical attacking type that can use a mix of special attacks or physical attacks, and they're commonly a mix of 2 types. Using Pokemon like Talonflame, Skarmory, or Tropius as good examples with strong capabilities with using mixed attacks at different times. Their weaknesses of Rock, Electric, and Ice make them fairly weak in general, but to accommodate for that, their strengths are combating Bug, Grass, and Fighting types. They commonly are stronger in physical attacks as well, and common strategies involve them hitting just as hard as possible, while using Roost to recover HP on the cost of their ground type immunity. Now for Dragon. Dragon types are more rare in earlier generations and have the benefits of being only weak to itself and ice. Since Generation 6, or the Kalos region, they have the added weakness of Fairy, making them more fragile in general. They otherwise will specialize in Special Attack, as a majority of them are a subclass of Pokemon called Pseudo-Legendary, hence why their stats are quite strong to say the least. The common strategy for these guys, which range from Pokemon like Dragonite, Garchomp, or Goodra, is to make use of their hard-hitting moves such as Outrage or Dragon Pulse. They can also make use of their own moves to hinder the opponent, such as Dragon Breath to possibly paralyze their opponent to hinder their speed at a low chance. Dark types are a more newer type since Generation 2 to balance out the strong Psychic types, and these guys are strong against Ghost as well. They're not as popular in more recent days with their weaknesses of Fairy, Fighting, and Bug, but they are still fairly powerful nonetheless. Pokemon like Absol, Zoroark, and Umbreon are potent, using really good physical attacks to put pressure on the field with their immunity to Psychic moves, and are capable of taking a few hits while acting as a support class as much as possible with moves like Knock Off or Foul Play to mess with their opponent. Steel types, much like Dark types, were introduced in Generation 2 as well, and has the benefit of easily being the physically bulkiest type on the roster. These guys are basically resistant to almost everything aside from Fighting, Ground, and Fire, which are their weaknesses. They attack with physical attacks in Generation 3 and lower, but have moves like Bullet Punch from Scizor, Gear Grind from Klinklang, or just taking in a large amount of damage like Fortress. Their main way to play is just to tank hits for the rest of your team, and using them as a support class to use status moves as much as needed. The final type to go over is Fairy, the most recent type to be implemented and was introduced in Generation 6. Fairy types are strong against Dark and Dragon, but weak to Poison and Steel types, and are surprisingly effective with special attacks. If they were introduced prior to Generation 4, I think each of their moves before the physical special split would mean that every single one of their moves would be classified as special. Pokemon like Clefable, Florges, and Togekiss are incredible with being able to take hits for their team as a supporting role with moves like Draining Kiss, and supporting the rest of their team by taking out their opponents swiftly with Moonblast. And that is every single type on the roster. Let's have a bit of a recap on what we went over. We've gone over all 18 types, gone through their attacking methods, explained their weaknesses, went over how they would be used in Generations 3 and lower before the physical special split existed, and how we can employ them in different strategies. In the next episode of Pokémon Educators, we'll go over the status moves and break down how to use them in battle effectively and mess with your opponents as much as possible. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen.